You good? Welcome everybody to Castlevania on the Nintendo Entertainment System on this Famicom style cart. I'm joined here by Comrade Control, who's a speedrunner of this game. Says allegedly it's his favorite game.
Yeah.
So, kind of before we start up here, what's kind of your history with Castlevania? Like, when did you start playing it first? Like, when was the first time you actually played the game?
I started playing Castlevania in high school, uh, probably around 2008.
And when did you start kind of speed running it?
This actually wasn't the first Castlevania game I played, but it's the one I took to the most, mostly because of the difficulty just pissed me right the fuck off. So I had to. Yeah.
That was the catalyst to get you to start playing it more and more.
I was in a band at the time, and my band member had an NES. He was obsessed with collecting old consoles and shit. And he had Castlevania, and I remember playing it in like a Flash version or something. And so during band practice, I'd pop it in and just sort of try and beat it. And I remember getting stuck on the second level a lot, and it pissed me off to no end. And I don't know, like fast forward years later, I learn about speedrunning, and while looking for games to speedrun, I come across Castlevania, and just sort of reignited that. What's the word I'm looking for? Memory, more like more like a desire to just beat it.
Memory.
And so it started with me just wanting to beat it, and then me just wanting to beat it fast, and then I realized I was sort of kind of good at it, and so I just kept trying to beat it faster and faster.
So that's pretty cool. Let me
Yes.
think. So obviously you got the Japanese cart for this. It's, the Famicom version of the game. Was there any particular reason why you went with the Famicom version of the game and not the
Yeah.
US cart?
There was one deciding factor.
Virtual console, anything like that?
There's this thing called easy mode, and it only exists on the Famicom cartridge, and so because I wanted to make it a little bit more legit when I decided to do an easy mode run, I went ahead and bought the cartridge. But that was the main reason.
It's got a pretty sick title screen too, if I do say so. Even though Castlevania's got a very
Yeah, I actually
a very
like
iconic
the start screen a lot.
Start screen also.
What I came to realize after getting this cartridge though, and getting my Famicom, I got the top loading version of the Famicom. Something really nice about it is unlike the North American top loader, which just uses the little RF switch RF cable. This actually uses the same AV cable that's used on the SNES, N64, and GameCube. So it's actually really convenient for switching between systems without having like a million different cables. I can just unplug the AV cable between each system. Yeah.
So without going into it too much, because we are going to have to hop into this game pretty soon, why don't you tell all the kids out there in Nowhere Land why RF switches are total complete shit, especially for capturing?
Yeah, I haven't even used one in forever. Oh, as far as capturing, yeah, you can't really. I'm sure you could find a way to capture within a RF switch, but it doesn't use the same kind of RCA cables that you would find on. Is RCA even the right term? I don't care. Um, it doesn't use the same kind of cables that you could just plug right into, say, a Dazzle. You know, the yellow, white, and red. You have to have some kind of. Probably have to run it through like a VCR, is what I'm guessing. And then run cables from the VCR to the. Yeah, it's a mess.
You have to actually have a TV that is capable of supporting the RF switch also, which, if you're ever wondering, just check on the back of your TV and it'll look like a little screw coming off of the back. I think the only thing that's worse than the RF switch is what the Atari had, where you had to like unscrew your TV and like clamp on this clamp ring.
But only for the first couple of years of my life.
All right. So I'd say that's enough kind of to jump into this. So let's go ahead and hop into easy, or into rather normal mode, I should say. We will be taking a look at easy mode at some point during this, just to kind of compare and contrast.
Because if you let it sit in its little demo for too long, the music will not play up until the first boss, when the music changes, and then the music comes back for the rest of the game. I don't know why. But that's something that exists on every single version of this game. So.
So immediately, very strong start with that intro. Like, I guess one of the biggest striking things, I mean, obviously you have these more or horror motifs inside of the game, and a lot of allusions to classic horror or motion pictures. But one of the big things is
yeah, it's actually one of the things I like about it is
for something that's
the color palette.
Spooky or a horror game.
Everything's real. That's what I'm looking for. It stands out. Like nothing's too wishy-washy. Like in Simon's Quest, the colors are just kind of really dull. But here, a majority of the screen, or at least a good portion of it, is like this orange color. Or maybe a red color, depending on what it looks like on the capture. Yes.
So you managed to do what's called the bat boost in speedrunning. It just kind of bypasses the underwater area that's below you. There's some mermen down there. We'll see it later, but one of the things that's kind of crazy about the water is that it actually has kind of splash animation.
Yeah, it does have a
cool.
Does have a little bit of a splash animation to it. So at the beginning there, when I was on the stairs, I tried to go for a crit, which is when I take damage and an enemy takes damage at the same time. But it's frame perfect, and I missed it. The reason we do that in the speedrun on the first boss right there is because it'll just one-hit the boss. And it saves about 2 seconds, which in a game as optimized as this is like the difference between world record and not world record.
So it looks like we're going to have to push it back to actually about 10 seconds for the response to come. And sorry, you guys, about the audio configuration, but this is just kind of what we need to do to make this work right now.
Yes.
So nice Medusa head boost there also, again, kind of bypassing the screens. So something just game design related, a lot of people go, well, why didn't you bounce off the ceiling? Well, they didn't really expect you to get that high.
Yeah, that's it's not a bad thing to bring up, is just why not bounce off the ceiling, but like you said, they didn't intend for something like that to ever happen.
So, obviously, in the first screen, or the first stage, I should say, we had the vampire bat, and here we're going to have the Medusa. Um, so you said that you tended to have a lot of problems with the second stage when you play this game casually. Where did you really run into issues at?
It was when the what screen is it? Right before the Medusa boost. The first Medusa that flies at you, if you just try to jump over that little gap right there all gung-ho without taking your time, you just get wrecked completely. And when I was playing this casually, I didn't think to really slow down and try and not get wrecked. But I just kept getting wrecked. And so I would have to go back through the entire stage again. And yeah.
So, could you stop for just a moment on this screen, actually? Okay, well, you passed it by. This next one we can stop for just a second, actually. So, we noticed that we have like a drastically different color palette than the other ones. Like now they're introducing like pastel blues and purples and stuff, mixing in with greens to make a really big contrast. They even have like the background shadows to create some type of panoramic effect, which is really interesting. This game has a lot of very interesting visual decisions, I
Yeah.
would say.
For its time, I mean, in '86, this had to have been one of the nicer looking games that you could get on console. What I like about this stage in particular, like you mentioned, the background having this brighter blue to it, is it's like the perfect complement to orange, so it really stands out.
So why don't you tell me kind of like what type of impact does that have both in gameplay and artistically? Like you mentioned a contrast. Orange is this complement or not complementary. Shit, what's the term? It's it works well with blue. Let's put it that way. It's across from it on the color pie. So what does that help you with gameplay wise, even not just from an artistic
For me, it
standpoint? Because I
just
think that's really important.
makes it easier to see everything coming in at me. Like on this stage in particular, there's a lot of birds, and if this was a game with a darker palette, it'd be kind of hard to see where they're coming from. In addition to that, there's also bone pillars or bone dragons or white dragons or whatever they're called that shoot tiny little flame projectiles. They're all over this stage. And once again, if it's a darker palette, it'd be really hard to see those coming in at you.
So having that kind of like flat blue is really important to seeing things like the outlines on the crows, seeing the fireballs when the bone pillars shoot them, and even the skeletons kind of stand out because they're a lighter color than the background. But I think another big thing also is that your platforms are orange. And in this stage, I would say more than any other stage before it, stage three is a game where it really starts introducing
Yeah,
platforming to you. Like
this
if
is
you
the
mess up on your jumps,
this
you're
is the
dead.
stage where for casual players the difficulty really ramps up, and in a speedrunning sense, or when you go to speedrun this game, if ever, this is actually one of the more difficult stages to just try and get it right every time. It's just if you make a mistake, it just sets you back so much. Um, it's probably
And this is a tough, I would say too, this is a very tough stage because once you get to the end of the stage, if you die, you have no
Yeah,
good sub-weapon.
I was going to mention that as well. If you die on what's referred to in the game as stage 09, but we use different terminology when speedrunning. But if you die in stage 9, you get one candle to break.
Stage, real quick, stage being the stage in the upper right. I use stage and level interchangeably. Sorry, folks. That's just a habit of mine.
Yeah, um, what was I gonna say?
I guess we can kind of move forward, and you can talk about
Sure,
that
that works
when
for
you
me.
hit stage 9, kind of. Just kind of keep moving, I guess.
So coming up here is kind of a tricky jump to hit, and because it's tricky, I'm just not even gonna go for it. I'd rather not die.
Oh man, skeleton showing his true form of out of bounds.
Okay, so coming up right here is the last section of state level 3. There's one candle you can hit there, and so if you die in this section, that's your only chance of getting a whip or anything again. And I'm
shutting up so that you don't get completely destroyed. Oh no! Big boners, please. Oh wait, can you stop?
No, I
Oh,
cannot.
fuck.
We're at the mummy fight now.
Can you go back slightly or no? Probably not. Alright. It's alright. There was just a background shot of the castle. That's all. Go ahead. So, mummies, another famous horror creature from the past. And they even changed the color palette where it's
Yeah, that's
green
something I
now
was
in the
gonna
background so that the
actually
mummies
mention.
pop out more.
Is the color palette changes to suit the bosses you're fighting just a little bit better. Also, the background sort of looks like tombs or something. Something mummies would probably come crawling out of. Yeah.
I actually never noticed
Yeah.
that.
Before I
Now
get
that you mention it.
too far ahead, actually no, it comes up later on level 5. I'll talk about that then. But right here for the mummy fight, this is kind of a hard one casually because you're fighting 2 enemies at once, which is something you also have to do on the next fight for the Frankenstein fight. But we have a neat little trick where if we get them to overlap and we throw across, it completely destroys them.
So, for all the casual players out there, what would
I
be your
would
suggestion
say,
for fighting these guys? Let's say they die
reset the
on
game.
stage 9.
No, don't do that. Going back to stage 6 is not a bad idea. For that fight, if you really want to cheese the fight, you can actually go down to the middle of the room and trigger the fight. Walk back to the left, jump up onto the platform, and hopefully you have holy water, and you can just lob it down onto them. That's that's probably the easiest way to do that fight.
Okay. So now we're inside stage 10, which is level 4 at this point. And I would say, you mentioned that there's a difficulty jump at level 3. this is where I think the game really starts showing its fangs. Like, this is where the enemies are dangerous, the platforming's dangerous, you have to worry about your sub-weapons, all this stuff. Great skull animations also on the bottom of the screen as you're moving through this cavern section.
Yeah, visually
like,
this
lots of awesome graphics.
stage is pretty neat. Well, I just screwed up everything, but we should be okay. Maybe not. All right. So.
So, probably one of the worst screens casually too are the Fleamen getting dropped by the Harpies, which are basically
Yeah, now that you
birds.
mention it, Stage 4 probably is more of a casual killer, especially for that section right there. There's a pattern you can take to avoid having to stop. But if you mess up once, you lose that pattern. If you're casual, you're probably going to take it real slow, which is going to mean you're going to get a lot of Fleamen dropped on you, and it'll just be a total nightmare.
Swarms, yeah. So, I'm guessing he's already dead yet, but once you get to the next stage, could you kind of compare and contrast, in a more casual sense, between Frankenstein and the mummies? Because you mentioned that they're the two fights where you have two bosses kind of attacking you. Could you talk about like the difficulties between both of them, like what you kind of think about, and why you think they decided to have that design? Two enemies, and how the change of design really changes your outlook on the fight.
The main difference between those two fights, there is two enemies you have to focus on in each one. But with the mummy fight, they introduce that concept on just a very easy to understand. What's the word I want to use here? A very just on just like one plane, so to speak. There's nothing coming in above you, which is something that'll happen on the Frankenstein fight. It's just the mummies going back and forth and shooting projectiles occasionally. Once you get to the Frankenstein fight, his little hunchback will jump up into the air. In addition to that, shooting fireballs down at you from different directions. So you can sit there and wail on Frankenstein with your whip as much as you want, but what's really killing you is not Frankenstein moving back and forth. It's the Fleaman jumping all over the place and shooting fireballs. And I actually kind of like how they introduced the idea of fighting two enemies at once in a boss fight with the mummy fight, and then ramping it up a bit in the Frankenstein fight. And going into the death fight coming up, you kind of have to, it kind of prepares you for that fight too, because in the death fight, death isn't really your enemy. It's everything he spawns, which is random scythes that fly everywhere, which we're not going to see.
I would also say that that's an interesting kind of, how would I put it? It's an interesting look at bossy or at boss creation in general, because in the mummy fight, both of them are your targets. You can hit either one and it progresses the fight. When you move to Fleaman and Frankenstein's monster, you can only hit Frankenstein's monster to kill him. You can hit the Fleaman and it stuns him and like stops him from moving, but you have to deal damage to the monster. And then you have Death, where you can hit the sides, but there are so many that it's almost better to dodge as many as you can, and maybe hit one here. Or
yeah, that's actually something I forgot to mention, was that hitting the Fleaman doesn't actually affect Frankenstein at all. It just slows down the Fleaman, which you don't actually, with that fight, you don't actually want to focus too much on hitting the Fleaman, since it doesn't do damage to Frankenstein. But it's something that can kind of come in handy once in a while. Um, I'm glad you added that. I also want to mention that just that concept, just that Frankenstein fight alone, um, can be seen in numerous other Castlevania games that would come out later that just have multiple enemies in a boss fight.
So you've obviously been abusing this game pretty heavily with the holy water. While you're moving through kind of the next couple screens, you want to kind of talk about why the holy water is so effective in this game, and why is it so effective kind of in the
Sure.
Castlevanias to come for the most part.
So, holy water is this. It's kind of unique to the other weapons in that it actually does something after it's thrown. Like the axes, they just get thrown and they deal damage on impact. Um, that really scared me right there. You'll see what I'm talking about. Um, when you throw it, it sticks around, and that flame it leaves behind is actually very useful for many reasons. Um, it can hit enemies that are following you from behind um, without you having to whip back around and hit them. So a well-placed holy water can actually speed the game up quite a bit. One of the more important aspects of it is the holy water actually stun locks enemies. And this is actually a really good stage to talk about holy water. When it stun locks enemies, you can also pass through them for some reason. And if you've never known, these knights on this stage that take like 9 whip hits, you can just kill them once with holy water for some reason. Why they decided that, I don't know, but
So something kind of interesting to talk about also is a lot of people find it very mysterious how the multipliers happen. For those of you that don't know, the multipliers are in the upper right shown. Right now he has a ×3 multiplier. And what that does is it allows you to have multiple sub-weapons on the screen at the same time. So you want to talk about kind of how multipliers are assessed, and do you think that's a good system for allowing you to progress your sub?
I'm gonna pause right there. Actually, you'll see why I paused. I actually like how the multiplier system works. It's kind of interesting. You can find multipliers as drops in candles or various hiding spots through the game. But how it works is if you use that sub-weapon on any object, if it hits it 10 times, then the next candle you break, whether with a sub-weapon or not, will actually drop a multiplier for it. And like you said, when you have a multiplier, you can have 2 of that sub-weapon on the screen. And of course, when you have 3, you can have 3. I'm trying to think what that would do for the difficulty of the game. I think it certainly rewards someone who's more skilled at the game. If you're more skilled at the game, you die less. It means you keep your multiplier, which means you're able to play the game not so much at an easier pace, since you have more sub-weapons you can throw, but maybe just at a faster pace.
So even though it's rough that you that you now have the dagger, I actually think that this is a good kind of. I actually think it's almost beneficial that you did, because it'll kind of show really the difficulty of death. So normally with holy water, you could just 100% stun lock death with the right kind of setup and enough hearts. But with knife, that's not really possible. um, Kind of talking about the background here also. We have a very cool palette throughout the rest of this stage. Obviously, right now we're catching this orange in the background for the curtains, but I think that's put in there on purpose in order to make this part like this is where the boss is. Get ready. I also like how there's kind of a retarded Dracula in the upper part of the stage there in the curtains. I don't know if you
I
can
never
see
noticed
it or
that.
not.
That's actually great. That's
But let's go ahead and
okay.
hop in on death and see
Real
what we
quick,
can
I
do
just wanted
here.
to mention something that a lot of people might not know is those square objects off to the right are actually portraits, and the cartridge versions of this game couldn't support. It didn't have enough memory to have the portraits up there, so they're just black boxes. So they're actually supposed to be paintings.
Yeah, I always wondered that because if you go back to Super Castlevania 4, which is essentially a remake of the first game, just in much better graphics on the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, they like bleed away into paintings, which is very different. Actually, I shouldn't. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, you're not too far off. I
Chronicles is
mean,
what I'm
they're
talking
they're
about on the
both
PlayStation.
essentially remakes. But I think we've delayed this long enough. I'm gonna jump right into death here, and hopefully, yep, it very well could be that.
Literally,
So
probably. Just
you
jump right
mentioned
into it.
earlier with holy water, something I didn't mention was you can actually infinitely stun lock enemies if you have a triple multiplier, but I don't have that, so we're gonna jump right in here, and you will see why this is difficult because of these scythes. And each one takes a quarter of your health. I had one right on top of me. Okay, so. Yep. That was the most pathetic thing that's ever happened in my life.
Bad news bears.
You will see.
So now this is another reason why this is a difficult boss, right? Is you don't have the holy water now, and there's no way to recover it before you get to the boss. However, you get the cross,
Yeah.
which many people view
Cross
as kind
is
of a good alternative for
your
this
next,
boss.
pretty much your next chance at beating death. You can get holy water back at the start of this stage. The start of this entire level, but you have to go back and you have to die and game over and all that.
So I will mention that during kind of watching some casual streams of this, I actually saw somebody take an interesting decision. They tried to take the axe all the way to death. And if you've never watched casual streams, even as a speedrunner, it's always kind of... It's an interesting view to see like what strategies people come up with if they don't know the best ones. And, you know, the axe actually works really good against death. Earlier, Comrade Control talked about how Holy Water controls a lot of space because it stays on the screen. Same thing for Axe. Axe is very much one of my favorite weapons inside of any Castlevania game. Because typically in a Castlevania game, especially the classic Vania games, you only control the space in front of you. You can only whip in one direction for most of them. What Axe does is it controls the space above you, which is really precious.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've tried to beat death without holy water, so I could mess up a couple times here. But I like what you mentioned about the axe. The axe is a bit better than I think people seem to think, especially in a couple titles that people probably haven't played before. I'll mention one right now, Castlevania Belmont's Revenge for the Game Boy. The axe is actually the best weapon in that game for the reason you just stated. It controls an area of the game that you have virtually no access to, which is above you. And yeah, that was just going to happen. Oh shit.
This is what happens when you don't cheese it out death, folks. Unless you're true false, then fuck off.
So I was gonna
pact with
game over myself there,
powers.
but I realized that might take too long. So I'm just gonna keep trying at it, and when I eventually fail 2 more times, we will get our holy water back and hopefully not lose it.
So obviously, if you were doing actual serious runs of this game, basically any death at your... Well, I guess you should also mention what your clear time of this game is and what the world record is. But at this point, if you take a death, that's it, right? You just reset.
Yeah. My current record is 1207. Yeah, pretty much any death in this game, playing at that sub 1230 level, pretty much any death means you're not going to get a PB. That's just how much it hurts you to die in this game, because you lose your sub weapons, you lose all your power-ups. There's pretty much nothing you can do if you die. So, interesting thing about this fight is the scythes actually stick around after you kill death. And if you die to them, yes, you have to go back and fight death again. Which, really sucks. Yeah. Luckily I did not die, if that's what you're anticipating.
To get to that orb.
Coming up here on stage 6, this is another casual killer, is this bridge right here, which involves platforming, and you're taking on what's essentially numerous stage 1 bosses. Unless you know exactly what to do, which when I do it, it's going to look really simple. Unless you know exactly what to do, it's very easy to die here.
I'd like to mention also that one of the biggest things that kills people when they're playing casually, besides not knowing the strength of holy water, is they try to kill everything. It happened a while ago, but in level 3, you... Was it level 3? Level 4, sorry. Level 4. You fought some white dragons just before the boss, and you just completely bypassed them. A lot of casual players just try to fight those, and they lose tons of health, and then end up just getting destroyed by the next boss. And then, obviously, we mentioned how Stage 3 was a bad place to die. Really, Stage 3, 4, and 5, if you die
there's not too much of a chance to recover at the end of those stages. And, yeah, that's something I didn't even think about, was the bone dragons, or whatever people call them. If you know how to get past them, they're really easy to get past. But yeah, I guess I didn't really think about the difficulty with them if you don't know what to do there. I don't think I have anything else to say about it, though.
But yeah, very precise place here. I love this this thing that a lot of game designers do also, where they kind of put a previous boss or difficult enemy and just show your progression in the game by making them a
Yeah,
more
it's
normal
actually
enemy.
makes you feel like you've actually um, not just progressed in the game, but um, it makes you feel like you've actually gotten better at the game. We are going to go for a death strat, since I took one extra hit.
So would you say that stage 6 is actually the hardest stage in the game? Because it's
The thing about
very
stage
short,
6
right?
is it it can be a very difficult stage if you don't know exactly what to do. Um, Especially that entire section right there that I just bypassed with the stopwatch, which that's the only sort of the only spot we really use it in the speedrun. There's a few other spots, but it's more advanced stuff that's not really worth mentioning. Um, um, yeah, right there we use the stopwatch because it freezes time. Normally there would be a bunch of harpies flying in from different directions, dropping flea men on you while you're trying to navigate some really rather small platforms. So basically, getting hit in the wrong spot means death. I would say casually, this is probably one of the harder stages, but it's also a very short stage. That's something I think I actually seem to forget about is you get through it really quick. Um, yeah, I can't think of anything else.
So make sure you pause here for a sec, because I actually want to comment on the background here. But one of the other big things is, I mentioned it's not a very long stage, but also when you die on Dracula, which is coming up here, sorry for spoiling basically a 20-year-old game. Sorry, almost 30-year-old game. But when you die on Dracula, you end up at the bottom of the staircase. So you don't really lose a lot of time that way, and you don't have to go back through the stage. So I think a lot of people, it may be a difficult few stage or a difficult few screens, but it's very short. So I kind of feel like level 5 is probably where the game becomes its hardest, because the stage is hard due to the knights and the density
Yeah,
of knights
stage
and
5
death.
is easily the hardest stage casually. Um, Funny enough, stage 5 is the easiest stage, speedrun wise. Maybe maybe harder than stage 1, but the thing with stage 5 is if you have holy water, it's a breeze. Um, if you don't, there's a reason why it's the most famous part of this game, because having to whip two knights in a hallway 9 times a piece with Medusa heads flying in at you from different directions is pretty difficult.
It should be noted also that many of the sub weapons don't work that well on the knights as well. So talking about this screen and its kind of shot composition, this is incredible for the NES. If you look at how many colors are being implemented here, both on the interface and in the stage itself, I mean, you have a moon that's clearly on collision course with the Earth with how big it is. Great castle graphics, just tinges of green and grime, giving you this sense of decay, kind of pushing it. This kind of really red brick that's reminiscent of blood. Just such good color composition and such great
Yeah,
shot composition, for lack of a
it
better
really
term.
brings home the I forgot what I was gonna say. Um, this idea that the castle is, of course, really old. Um, I always thought it was kind of weird too how there's just a staircase leading up to this sort of magical little place in the sky where Dracula's sitting. But
Yeah, it's definitely a very strong set piece to the end of the game, and I really enjoy it. Even watching it casually, it still is pretty amazing. So I mentioned color a lot, and we didn't really talk about it a lot, but the Nintendo did not have an expansive color palette, and it did not have the ability to grab a lot of colors in a scene specifically. So to make the best use of those colors that you have is such a big thing
yeah,
with these games. And a lot of games did so
it's one of
well
the
with it.
nice things about actually being limited by your hardware is you have to get more creative with what you have, and because of that, they had to. I mean, it's really simple colors on the screen, but they make it work together really well.
Art from adversity is a term that I hear pretty often when describing games of the PS2 era and below, and I think that's a very apt term. Even less so with PS2 because you had DVDs which still had a ton of space on them, but still, you had to make things work. You didn't have infinite space,
Yeah, at a certain
virtually.
point, I think uh, art and just graphics and visuals and games in general has sort of plateaued to a point where games aren't trying to go. Some games aren't trying to go for the most realistic looking graphics, but just what looks unique and different to sort of stand out from AAA titles where the goal is to just make it look realistic.
I definitely can agree with that, and I think that is a very strong point to point out. I think that having stylized graphics or something that pops to people is much more impactful to something that has a very ruddy palette and
Yes.
realistic graphics.
So let's move on to this Dracula fight here. I died before Dracula, just so I would have full health for this fight because I'm gonna go for that critical hit trick that I mentioned earlier, just because it saves a ton of time. Um, the something to note about the Dracula fight is that it's not actually that difficult when you know what to do. His second form is kind of a pain, but it's not. Yeah, I. That was interesting. Well, you're gonna see an interesting fight.
Just a lot of practice.
So Dracula spawns all around the room. He has something of a pattern, and oh my god, you can sort of manipulate it. Um, like, for example, he'll spawn to the right here, and then he'll spawn to the left. If you get hit, that pattern sort of changes. I'm not going to go for the critical hit glitch anymore, since I don't have my holy water. Oh my god, I don't even have holy water? What? I thought I didn't have... Okay. This is going to be a really interesting fight. Basically, you're going to see some like low percent strats come out. But yeah, this fight's actually not that hard. It's the second form that usually does most casual gamers in. That and if you don't know the strategy when fighting this fight, you just kind of got to keep moving. So right there, I ducked to try and manipulate the second form to jump higher. So that way I could get out from under him. Most of the times it works. Because I could utilize these crosses a bit here. The main issue with this boss is he only has one spot to hit, that'll actually hurt him, and it takes a ton of damage to kill him, and he takes up a very good portion of the screen. Usually what hurts people there is just getting caught in a corner. They typically don't know what to do. But with Holy Water, it's of course simple. You just stun lock him and kill him. And now we can talk about the credits.
Very, very, very good stun lock, or not stun lock, but very, very good cross fight on the second.
So the credits, for some reason, they decided to take famous horror movie actors from like the 50s and earlier, and just change their name to something stupid for no reason. Like it's barely funny, and it's at the end of a horror-themed game, which kind of makes you wonder why they were going for humor at the end of it, but...
It makes a lot of sense when you look at, well, from what I understand is Japanese humor, it's a lot of puns and double meanings and words that sound like other words. So I guess in that respect, maybe it was translated very well.
Something this game does at the end, like a lot of some of the older games, is it just repeats the game, but sort of ramps it up to a harder difficulty. There's not too much to say about it. You take as much damage as you would if you were playing on stage 4 and higher, which is a quarter of your health, and they just add some extra enemies like the bats here. Yeah, I was actually just about to mention that. Well. The enemies move faster, also which correct. You wouldn't think changes much, but it actually changes a lot. Your reaction time has to be on point, and some of the stuff you would normally do, you can't do anymore because enemies are just coming at you too fast. I'll try and, before we switch over to easy mode, I'll just try and show off the bat boost again. The bat boost isn't too hard on easy mode or normal mode, but the second time around, you have to time it a little bit quicker because of the speed the bat's coming in at. That's all I really had to say.
And you actually hit it first try, which is really good. But you notice, as you mentioned, it takes away 4 bars of your health, which you only have 16 HP. And that's a lot. So, like, a lot of boosts that you would use in this game are also much more
the second time going through, boosts are kind of... speedrunning it on hard, we call this hard mode, basically, is actually harder. Because a lot of the sort of just a lot of the boosts that speed up the game in general, we have to either cut back on or time differently, or we have to slow down at other parts of the game where we would normally risk getting hit and not get hit, so we have health for a boost.
So, before we kind of switch over to the easy mode of the game, which we wanted to kind of show off a little bit, what did you think of the transition where you have a map that kind of shows up?
It helps to show you what's coming up for the game, which is something that I don't think a lot of games do, at least not back in '86. It also sort of shows off the different sections of the next level you would be going into. It also shows just how crazy the design of this castle is.
All right, so before we actually start up with easy mode, we're going to take a short break.
I can just keep jumping here. That works.
All right. So, we ready to go live?
Yes.
All right.
Before we switch to easy
back.
mode, I am showing off something weird that happens in the hard mode of this game only, which are these Medusa heads that'll fly across the screen, like you just saw there, and another one. And another one. I don't know why it happens. Somebody that's smarter than me could probably explain it. Something to do with you going above the screen, I'm sure. I don't know anything about that. All right.
So, one of the things that we should really talk about is when a lot of people think about action series on the Nintendo, I think a few games come to mind. I think Castlevania is up there. I think Mega Man is there. Ninja Gaiden. Really, those three games just stand out as the action series, the ones with the trilogies. Um, but Castlevania has a very unique trait about it, I should say. So, Castlevania comes out on the Famicom Disk System in 1986, late in 1986. And it comes out in North America on the NES in 87. But you actually have a version on the Famicom. And what is the release on the Famicom? And like, what's kind of the story behind that?
What happened was, I'm trying to think here. Originally, the Famicom came out, and shortly after that, or maybe it was alongside of it, I don't remember, the Disk System came out. And what Nintendo was trying to push was actually the Disk System. And so a lot of games were being made solely for the Disk System. And then as the years went on, they noticed the sales of the Famicom were doing much better than the Disk System was. And it wasn't so much based off the games that were on the Famicom, because the Disk System actually had the better library, but it was actually just the hardware itself. The Disk System was floppy disks. It had to load, and it was complete garbage compared to cartridge.
And I believe it was the 3.5-inch floppy disks, to be correct, right? And I don't think they were double density, although I'm sure some nerd when I upload this to YouTube will correct me on that.
I want to say yes, they were actually 3.5-inch, which for that time was actually. I was born in '92, so fuck if I know, but I would imagine in '85, '86, 3.5-inch floppies were probably sort of the cutting edge, because I know back then 5.25-inch floppies were very much the thing.
They weren't necessarily the cutting edge at that point, but I would definitely say that in '86, you compare the memory carrying capacity of a cartridge with chips compared to a floppy disk, and it's no comparison.
Definitely.
Like the floppy disk blows it away.
I kind of hesitated to say cutting edge there because, I mean, it wasn't the next greatest thing, but you are right. The memory capacity is insane compared to cartridges. And it's actually part of the reason why Nintendo stuck with cartridges all the way up until the N64, when discs were being sort of championed by PlayStation, and all those other weird systems like 3DI and 3DO or whatever they were. But and despite having sort of worse looking games, the load times were always amazing, even all the way up until the N64. But back on the topic of the Famicom, so Nintendo, I don't know why '93 was the magic year for it, but in '93 Nintendo recognized that the Famicom was obviously outselling the Disk System, so this was after the release of the Super Nintendo even. So they re-released a lot of those older Disk System only games. At a certain point, they just mostly made games for the Famicom, I believe. But in '93, they decided to release a lot of older titles for the Famicom itself, and it was Japan only, unfortunately. Well, we already had our NES cartridge versions in America, so I guess it didn't really matter to us. But for some reason, they decided to put an easy mode in the Japanese only version, which isn't something you would expect.
The easy the easy mode is a stark contrast, right? Like for the most part, most games were either dumbed down for a Western audience, or they just I don't know, they just would
Yeah,
fundamentally change the game
it,
or create an
it
easier
almost comes
mode.
off as sort of last minute idea or thought. Like they didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it. They were just like, let's. I can imagine them uh, actually asking people what was hard about this game, and they just made a list of everything that they heard as common complaints and just fixed it. Not necessarily fix it, but just get rid of it altogether to make the game easier. Because that's, I mean, they don't redesign anything. None of the changes in easy mode are with gameplay in mind. It's just, here you go. You can beat the game easier, I guess.
So I mentioned how there was no NES released for, or sorry, so a Famicom release for quite some time. And with that in mind, even though the disk system version did come out first, I'm not going to deny that at all. I've always felt like the Castlevania series has always been a very Western game. Like, Castlevania has, from all accounts that I've heard of, has sold way better in the Western Hemisphere. And I guess you could say in Europe as well, but basically outside of Japan and outside of the Far East, it's sold way better. So it's almost a game that's for us. Well, as if you think about like Mega Man, which has sold tons of copies in Japan, it's that's shown by the prices on the Rockman carts versus the Mega Man carts now. Same thing for Ninja Gaiden, other various action games, but Castlevania is kind of like ours,
Yeah, and I never actually
for lack
thought
of a
about
better term.
that, but when you mention it, yeah, I sort of know I sort of see what you're talking about. And I think the reason for that mostly just has to do with the themes found in Castlevania. Not so much that it's a horror theme, but it's very old horror. You know, very uh, yeah, very Western horror. It pulls enemies straight out of the old
Very
1930s through
Western
50s
horror as well,
famous
I would say.
monsters horror movies with even into the newer games with werewolves and shit like that.
So I guess we can kind of get started on easy mode. And when you start up easy mode, if you could stop on kind of the first screen, even just to kind of look at the background there, because I think it's a very striking scene as well. But also, we can kind of talk about a couple of game mechanics that we
Certainly.
just barely
Um,
touched on.
so this is the first screen of the game.
So what I was mentioning was we didn't really touch on it. So let's again comparing and contrasting these three major franchises. You had Mega Man, where your jump is you can do whatever the shit you want when you jump. You can go left, you can go right, you can wiggle. You get lots of air control in general. You can alter your height of your jump based on how long you hold A. You can attack multiple times when you jump. All these things. In Ninja Gaiden, you get the ability to move forward a lot. You get to kind of tweak your forward movement quite a bit. Uh, Changing direction is almost non-existent or very poor, and so is jumping backwards once you've jumped straight up. The other thing is when you jump in Ninja Gaiden, it's a fixed height. You're jumping or you're not. So then we come to Castlevania, and would you like to kind of discuss how Castlevania
Yeah,
or how
so in
Castlevania's jumps work? Sorry,
Castlevania, I think is what you said. No. So yeah, in Castlevania, how the jumps work is you are very, very, that's what I'm looking for, dedicated to your jump. When you make a jump, if you neutral jump, you're not moving. No matter what you do, as long as you're in air, unless you get hit, you're not moving. When you are moving forward and you jump, you are stuck to that. There's no changing that. And without trying to quote too many YouTubers, it's actually actually, I don't even know where I was going with that. So I'll just continue.
just take a couple seconds.
A lot of people complain
You can talk
about being restricted to jumping the moment you make that jump. I personally kind of like it. I don't want to say that I like it because it's more realistic. Like, if you jump in real life, you know, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to alter where you're jumping to. It's just not something you can really do. But I kind of like it. In this game, I don't really know how to describe it. God, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Because the jumping's like this, it forces you to be more committed to where you're jumping to. And in games like Mario, where you run super fast, you can jump all over the place, you're not really punished for just breezing through the game. Whereas a game like Castlevania, you're punished for moving too quickly through the game. And I think one of the biggest hindrances to your movement in this game is just only being able to jump. You're just completely dedicated to that jump.
So real quick, since I feel we've kind of touched on the jumping subject for a good amount and talked about it enough. This initial background, like, we keep missing the intro, but I think enough people realize the brilliance of it. Just the intro of Simon looking at this foreboding castle, but this initial one, immediately you see this kind of contrast of colors, the combination of colors, the flame with its red and orange hue and kind of pink. You have greens, you have multiple browns, you have like the dying trees in the backgrounds, the statues.
Yeah, it
very, very strong.
It really sets the mood for the game to come. Something I don't think we've oh, one thing I want to mention is just I never truly understood what was going on in the background with all the green. I want to say they're trees, but then actually, yeah, they probably are just trees. The little dead trees are probably just like bushes or something. Who knows? But yeah.
I've always thought of them as trees, but now that you mention it, that is kind of odd how you don't see any trunks or anything.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I think Simon's Quest did right. Was just giving the trees trunks. But then again, that's a game where you see trees a lot, so...
I think the negative space was important, though. Like, if you did add tree trunks, I think you'd have to use them sparingly.
Yeah,
in
you're
this case,
you're actually
in
correct.
order
It
to
might
keep
be
the shot
a little too distracting with
what you wanted.
everything else that's going on in the perspective-wise closer to Simon. But oh, I am about to die, ain't I? We didn't get very far, anyways.
All right, so did we want to reset, by the way, because you're about to
So this game
time out here. But yeah, I thought it was really important to touch on that jumping mechanic. And you notice, so in the normal game, when you get hit, you get damage boosted a significant portion back. What damage boost means is when you get hit, oftentimes in games you get pushed backwards or forwards or whatever. That's very prevalent in NES games, and usually when you get hit, it knocks you into a pit and you die. So that's a very big challenge point in this game where your jump is very stiff. There's lots of pits in certain stages.
Yeah.
Very easy to die.
And easy mode completely throws that out the door. And I will demonstrate whilst trying to go for the bat skip at the next section.
So I guess now that you've opened up the conversation about it, what are a couple of the changes that you can mention about
I
easy
will
mode?
pause the game to explain that, because there's quite a few little things that aren't really that important, and then there's a few big changes. A few of the minor changes, real quick. You start the game with 10 lives instead of, I don't know, it's like 3 or 4. I think it's 3 on normal. I don't die that many times, so I don't really know. Or I just, later in the game, when I do die a bunch of times, I end up getting extra lives along the way, so I don't even know anymore. But you start with 10 lives, which is very generous for a game that technically doesn't have game overs. You just go back to the beginning of the level. You also start with 30 hearts, and something we didn't mention is the hearts actually dictate what drops you get out of candles. If you have 8 or more hearts, you will get a upgraded whip drop. Your normal whip drop, you'll get very often from candles, unless there's a predetermined item in it. And that's because you're on the most basic whip, and they want to upgrade you to the next one. It's a very odd way of trying. It's just very odd that they made it so that you have to have 8 or more hearts to get the second upgrade to the whip, and is kind of a pain when speedrunning this game because you have to manage your hearts properly. Because for levels 1 through 4, we get the long whip in level 4, but we don't get the long whip, and it's for a more technical reason. So yeah, so you start out with a bunch of hearts, which means pretty much every candle you break is going to be a whip drop until you decide to pick it up. What else did they change?
So the reason why he's mentioning this is in the 4th level of the game, there is a particular sequence of movements they do to get a damage boost out of bounds to skip a section of the stage. This isn't really possible in easy because of another change he's going to mention, but basically that's no longer
something you may have noticed is I took a hit going up the stairs, and we take a hit there going up the stairs because you don't get damage boost, or you don't get knockback when you're on stairs. So it's actually faster just to take the hit there. But something you'll notice is I only took 1 point of damage instead of 2 normally. That's one of the other changes is you take half damage now, and you deal double damage. for the most part. Trying to think of some other little minor changes they added. Uh,
Well, the inability to get knocked back, I think, is the big one. So in the normal game, obviously, I mentioned how getting knocked back is a huge factor in the difficulty of this game. When you remove that, as easy mode does, it's entirely different to speedrun.
yeah.
And
So
even
in normal
casually.
mode, we would normally boost right here with this bat. And as you can see, when I get hit, I just freeze in the middle of the air. And I just drop. So while casually it might make the game easier, it actually makes it so that easy mode is pretty much always going to be slower. I've gotten it below 12 minutes, but that's still 19 seconds slower than the normal mode world record. Or 18 seconds. But yeah, without the damage boost, you have to see parts of the game you would normally never see, and it's really not fit for speedrunning.
So if you wanted to try to show off the crit here, since you have kind of a little bit of life to play with.
Yeah, I will give it a shot. So how the crit works is, in this game, when you take, I explained this earlier, but when you take damage on the exact same frame that you deal damage, it transfers the damage back, like what I just did right there, and it kills that boss in one hit. It might kill Medusa in 1 or 2 hits, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to see the TAS again, where it actually implements that strategy on every single boss, since it's obviously faster.
So to talk about a couple of terms that he used there, also a TAS is a tool-assisted speedrun. It's basically people playing, for lack of a better term, through a computer in order to have perfect execution and perfect RNG, random number generation. Basically making it so that the game doesn't do the worst possible outcomes, but the best every time. And the other term that he used was frame. He's talking about animation frames, basically the NES on NTSC, which is standard for North America and Japan, is 60 frames per second. So every second there will be 60 animation frames that can play. So for something to be 1 frame, he's saying that he needs to hit the enemy and get hit within 1/60th of a second. So it's a very tight timing window.
And for that reason, the main difference between TAS and being a human is TAS can hit that every single time if it wants to, and humans sort of can. Like, if I were to grind out this game again and just really pound out the runs, I can average like maybe 60-70% chance of hitting that crit on the first bat. It gets implemented later against Dracula as well, since it deals so much damage to him, as opposed to just whipping him normally, which only takes 1 hit point away. We can take away 6 instead. Against Dracula, it's a lot harder because of how you get hit by Dracula's with fireballs, and the timing is really sort of awkward. He kind of shoots them up at you at a fast pace, a sort of fast pace, and a slower pace. It's kind of garbage to speedrun, anyways. But yeah, right here there would normally be a damage boost, and I'm actually got a setup for it where I get hit twice by Medusas, and that's to actually, well, I just blew it. That's actually to time the moving platforms over there. But since I blew it, I'm just gonna... So normally I'd be able to just jump across these platforms relatively quickly.
So we're getting to see also kind of this whole screen and how much that actually skips. And you even skipped part of that screen even
Yeah.
with that.
So
And then, you know,
let's
pulls.
try that again. So I don't have the cross, so it's a little weird. Because normally I'd throw it to kill that knight up there, which I'm going to get hit, so rip. Yeah. It's actually a very tight timing, and this is the run killer, actually, in easy mode, is just nailing these platforms properly. If you don't, you actually lose, like, 10 seconds. So, that's the hardest part of easy mode.
So something that we obviously didn't talk about, the music in this game. How iconic is it?
How iconic is it? Compared to other games, it's probably some of the more memorable music. I mean, it's easily right up there with. I don't want to say right up there with Super Mario, because I think everybody knows Super Mario. Even people that don't even play fucking video games know what Mario is. You know, like my dad knows what Mario is, and he stopped playing video games when like the fucking Odyssey came out or something. So, um,
I do think that you mentioned Super Mario. I absolutely agree. I don't think it came to that high, but even though I'm not the biggest Mega Man fan, I definitely think that there are certain tracks in Castlevania that you could pick out of a lineup way easier than
yeah,
Mega Man or Ninja
the
Gaiden.
the music for Castlevania just said it sort of had its own style that sort of separated it from other games. It went for more of a I don't want to say a faster paced soundtrack because that's not necessarily true. There's plenty of games that had more upbeat tempos, but um, I guess God, I'm a musician myself, and I'm trying to think of just how to put it exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned upbeat tempos. I honestly think that Castlevania actually has slower type of tunes, things that really try to accentuate mood more, try to encourage tension almost in this scene, which is extremely bold for an 8-bit music styling, especially in an NES or Famicom format. But I think it works extremely well.
Yeah, this is actually probably one of the earliest examples of a game actually trying to sort of set the mood with music. Just from the very start of the game, when you walk up to that castle with that sort of ominous music playing, and right up to the end of the game, when the music just has this real I wouldn't say so much as creepy as just this sort of weird droning dissonant thing going on where it's uh, just a lot of notes on the chromatic scale just going up and down. It's sort of like this unnerving sort of music playing while you're trying to fight the Dracula. One of the one of the biggest the Dracula. Um, but yeah, I think you're right.
The
Um,
Dracula.
with the tempo, it actually is it actually is slowed down a bit more. Um, which definitely, like you said, sets the mood a bit better. Uh, I wanted to talk more about like just music theory in general, but I ain't got time for that.
So so you talked about how would I put it? you mentioned basically that first theme that plays as you're coming up to Castlevania. And what is it, 7 seconds, I want to say? Maybe not even that. And I think you're absolutely right. And I hadn't thought of it at that time. But that 7 second jingle, if you want to call it that, sets the mood so strongly along with the visuals that are showing.
Yeah,
Is so powerful.
something I always think about when I boot up this game and I get that 7 or 8 seconds of music, somewhere around there. It's pretty close to the actual time. Um, Something I always think about is what actually truly got me into the Castlevania series is uh, Angry Video Game Nerds Castlevania marathon episodes that he did, like, I don't know, back in like 2007 or 8. Um, the first episode where he pops that evil son of a bitch into the Nintendo and turns it on, and just him hiding under the blanket as the music plays, and he says, "Oh shit!" It's he sort of explained what I was trying to say about just it being very ominous about what's to come.
So, man, now I'm trying to remember exactly what I was thinking. So, usually I ask this question a little bit earlier, at least for the purpose of this spookathon or whatever you want to call it. But, do you remember the first time that you played Castlevania? What you played, what you felt, how far you got,
Yeah.
all those
So the
types of
first time I played
things.
Castlevania was when I was sitting in a web design class, and I was bored as shit because it's web design, and I decided to look up some old Nintendo games to play, and it was really AVGN's Castlevania episodes that really sort of even reminded me that those games existed. So I decided to play a crappy Java version of this game, and my first impressions of the game were just
Well, hold on one sec. Was the Java version any good? Like, did it? Do you feel, besides the
I
lag or whatever, do you think it accurately
it was
presented
the
the game to
video
you?
game. I can say that at least. There was some lag. I was playing on a keyboard. It was awful. Um, and all the text was in Spanish. That was very confusing. Um, Probably because I know there's a ROM floating out there that's in Spanish that gets moved around on a lot of sites that won't be mentioned. I don't know why it's Spanish, but it is. But yeah, my initial thoughts of the game were just that the controls felt really stiff. It was a lot different from other games and just how the controls were, and I fell in love with the music right away. Like, even when I couldn't get past stage two, um, or level two or whatever, uh, I still looked up the music for this game and listened to it on repeat while in class. And then that's sort of when I started to look at other Castlevania games. I looked into them mostly just for their music, not even so much for the games.
All right, so let's go ahead and kind of move forward a little bit, and I'll kind of retouch on music later when we get to level 3, if you can remind me. But definitely
Yeah,
extremely
especially on
iconic
stage
stuff,
three. That
in my
seems to
opinion.
be everybody's favorite track. It's certainly my favorite track too. I don't know why neutral jumped there. Um, so yeah, I mentioned how you deal extra damage to bosses here. Uh, I'll demonstrate that real quick with Medusa. As you can see, her health just disappeared. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
And hopefully we'll get to see that a little bit more when it comes to Dracula. But we're coming up to level 3, which is, I believe the track is called Wicked Child, and many people consider this the best track in Castlevania 1. I disagree a little bit, but I think it's very, very good. If you were to ask me, gun to my head, what's the best track in any Castlevania game? Probably Bloody Tears for me, but it's Wicked Child is definitely in the top 10, probably in the top 5.
You can't really... You can't beat this music. When it comes to this game, this is, in my opinion, the best track on the game. With maybe the first track right behind it. I just forgot something. If I can get it. There's no penalty of getting hit, really, since I'll never die.
So what do you think about the introduction of enemies in this game?
I think it goes back
to
pace?
Do you think it's a little quick?
Sort of what I said about...
What's your take on that?
What I said about the difference between the Mummy and the Frankenstein. The Frankenstein's monster, I suppose, is what you would call it. The first enemies you fight in the game come at you from one angle. It's all coming at you horizontally. I just got a crit there. That was interesting. And I just got to show off the horrible hitboxes on the skeletons. Alright. But yeah, the first enemies you face in this game are just coming at you from one direction. There's no fear of anything above you or below you. Well, for the most part, there are the fishmen in that one room that speedrunners never really see. I just threw a wrench into what I was saying. Those fuckers. Ah, whatever. Just pretend those don't exist.
Something about...
Yeah, then I got hung up on the fishmen because they don't go just left to right. But, yeah, the beginning of the game starts you off with just some really easy enemies. You can really... It's very easy to predict where they're going to go. If they're walking to the left, they're only going to keep going left. And you learn that very quickly. Once you get to the second stage, it has that same... Not... Once you get to the second stage, it introduces enemies that have more of a specific pattern. They're not just going completely all the way to the left. When you face that first armor, he just kind of goes back and forth in just sort of a set little area. You can sort of manipulate it, and his pattern does sort of change if you get close to him, which
it's very different, and I do think that the second, or I would say almost the third stage. You get second stage, you get Medusa heads and knights, but I think the third stage is where you really start to see it because you get thrown Fleeman immediately. Then knights, bone pillars are more of an issue. You get crows, and crows are something that I think a lot of people have trouble with in a casual sense.
Even speedrunners have trouble with birds or crows, let me tell you. Their pattern is, I don't want to say random, because their pattern isn't random. When speedrunning this, they tend to take one of two patterns, and you have to...
It's very erratic if you don't play the game in a very structured way. Like if you aren't speedrunning, if you aren't maybe in the exact same way and killing them very quickly,
Yeah,
it can get out of
they
control.
just sort of fly all over the place below you. The one I really hate is they fly in slightly above you, so you can't whip them. So you got to sort of time your jump and your whip at the same time. They can be manipulated, though. It's not fun doing so. They don't really cooperate half the time. But yeah, the game does a really good job, I think, of introducing new enemies. Whether it's introducing an enemy that you get a little bit of early on in the game, and then hitting you with it like full force later on in the game, or just introducing an enemy that's similar to a harder enemy you face later in the game, which is pretty much the same thing as introducing the enemy.
And I do somewhat apologize for us taking kind of these frequent and long pauses, but I think they are very important for getting ideas in, because this is a very fast game, especially when you speedrun. And I think you can really learn a lot from a still screenshot of these not new, definitely not new, but these very iconic and excellently made games. For example, this mummy that he's coming up on, as long as you know this is a horror game, I think you could easily tell that this is a mummy. Like, how much can you strip away from something while it is still definitely recognizable as that thing? And I always find that extremely fascinating, this minimalistic approach. And it's not a minimalistic approach as, how would I put it? They aren't trying to make it minimalistic, but they had to because of the restriction of the hardware.
Yeah, they had to work with what they had. They did a damn good job, I think. Even with the mummies, I mean, with as little colors as they have to work with as little as they have to use, they were still able to make the mummies look like mummies. They didn't, like, if you look close enough, they didn't just make them white or gray. You can actually see the sort of striped pattern from a lighter blue to a darker blue. And just that level of detail on the NES, like really early on in the NES's life, was just way ahead of its time, I think. So there's nothing really to mention about this fight. It's not the same as normal mode. I guess I should have mentioned that. One really weird change they did to easy mode is they fixed the mummy pattern. The reason being for this, with them overlapping, I think the reason they've changed that is because people may have complained about the mummies coming in from both directions and really messing you up. So they had to probably change the pattern to make it a little bit easier. It's the only thing I can think of.
So a bit of background, I mentioned colors being an issue and a limitation in the NES. The NES, from Wikipedia itself, mentions that the NES had 54 useful colors. And I can mention that most of those were blue. That is famously the reason why Mega Man is the blue bomber. And the quote, the NES could select 4 palettes containing one of these colors. However, color 0 of each palette could or has to be the same, so technically 13 different colors are available at a time. So you have 13 colors on any screen for the game graphics and the interface. So what you could do with 13 colors in some of these games is fucking
like we talked about with just limitations. It's pretty insane when you think about it. just how much they can get out of 13 colors. And right now I'm just showing off with how easy it is to manipulate the Fleamen. And now before I die, I'm going to continue the game. That's, oddly enough, that's one of the... It's actually very easy to die in easy mode because you're not really thinking about your life, so... Yeah. So you gotta watch out for that. Like, you're not getting knocked back, so there's not really... Other than you freezing for like half a second and then a sound of you getting hit, there's not a whole lot of indicator that you just got hit.
So Derek Alexander, or Happy Video Game Nerd, as he's known on YouTube, before he changed his tag to Stop Skeletons from Fighting, described the movement in the early Castlevanias to a lethargic stride, and I think that's very fitting. Simon, Christopher, Trevor. These early Belmonts are very slow, and they're very stiff when they jump. Do you think that was a deliberate choice, and do you think it was a good one? How did it impact the game design? And how did it make sub-weapons important or less important? In the case of Castlevania 4, I guess I would say.
Basically makes sub-weapons essential. I'm not going to say you can't beat the game without sub-weapons, because you can. It's possible. It's difficult. It's like playing the game on brutal mode or something. But it puts more of an emphasis on the use of sub-weapons. You actually kind of got to get creative with when to use them. Do you want to use this at this part of the game? Do you want to use this at that part of the game? And the developers actually put certain sub-items at certain parts of the game as, I think, sort of a suggestion as to, you know, what to use against what enemy. Like, when it comes to speedrunning, that part of level 4 with the harpies dropping Fleamen on you is one of the scariest parts of the speedrun, just because you can get an axe drop. It's a very common drop. You don't want the axe drop, you want holy water. But the reason I think they give you the holy water, or the axe there, is because the axe gives you, like you said earlier, access to a certain part of the screen that you would normally not have access to, and that's above you. Which, against flying enemies, not too bad. Axe is actually pretty decent at that part of the game. It's just, you don't want it. So, the items actually are very important when it comes to playing this game. And as far as the movement of the character being deliberate, absolutely. They could have made Simon as fast as Mario. You know, they could have made him jump around and flip off walls.
They could have added a run button. They could have changed his jump to be more like Ryu Hayabusa and Ninja Gaiden, which I believe is a Konami game. Or no, that was a Tecmo game. But it did come out kind of as a contemporary to some extent, especially when you get into further iterations of the game. But they chose to make him move at this speed and jump with this type of... You said commitment. Some people would say stiffness. I think stiff is a better term, but I don't think of it as a negative connotation either. So I don't know. Maybe the way that you put it was a better way to think of it, because I think it was planned. You are supposed to jump in a straight line. You aren't supposed to have great air control, but yeah, it is definitely a conscious choice.
I definitely don't think it was something that Konami messed up on. A later I don't want to really call it version, but I would say more of a remake, like Super Castlevania is what I'm going to be talking about. They sort of address uh, the issue that I think some people may have had with that, and yeah, I think the only reason I've ever really considered the term stiff in sort of a negative manner is just because people usually use it in a negative manner. Um, but uh, yeah, Super Castlevania 4. That's a pretty pretty.
It is quite a different beast, is it not? So I mentioned how sub weapons are important to controlling space around you. You mentioned how they give you abilities that they accentuate how limited you are, but improve on those weaknesses. Um, what's his name? Eric Hansen, Ego Raptor, mentioned in his review that he felt like the whip makes these things almost obsolete because you had 8 direction whipping movement. I don't agree with that. I think that the sub weapons are extremely important in that game, but it is true that they lose value. And I would argue that they are important because if you watch his playthrough, which he didn't finish, you know, it's slight shots fired, but he's a good guy. He uses sub weapons, and when he doesn't use sub weapons, he gets destroyed. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
pretty much all I was gonna say about it. Is just Simon is definitely you're definitely more in control of Simon's movement in that game, and the sub weapons don't really play a huge role in it. It's uh, it's more of just something you can use. Um,
Yeah, I do think that the sub weapons in Super Castlevania 4 are powerful. Now, whether or not they're necessary or not, I mean, let's be frank. In Castlevania 1, they aren't necessary, but they are such a boon if you can keep the one that you want. And I think the same can be said
uh,
of Castlevania
yeah,
4.
to some extent. I feel like with Castlevania 4, I feel like progressing through the game isn't too difficult without the sub weapon. And with Castlevania, whether you're a speedrunner or even casual, losing that sub weapon could very well mean whether or not you continue through the game or if you decide to just kill yourself to go back to the start of a level to get the sub weapon again, or if you just restart the game outright. It's I certainly feel like it's much more important in this game. When it comes to sub weapons in Castlevania 4, they are powerful, but I don't think they're anywhere near as necessary. Once again, I don't really want to use the word necessary because you can beat this game without sub weapons, but it's hard.
They are definitely a strong option though. But I guess we should kind of continue on with the game. Let's
Okay.
kill off death. I gotta go to the restroom.
Um,
Gotta take a piss.
so I don't have holy water anymore, which is reminding me of the last run, but that's okay. Um, because we don't really need holy water too much against death. Crosses will kill him extremely fast. Crosses will actually kill death faster.
So, as a question, I mentioned how in a casual playthrough I'd watched somebody use the axe. Have you ever tried to use like a ×2 or ×3
I can't
axe
say I
against
ever
death?
have, mostly because it's just not really necessary. Um, I, basically, when it comes to the death fight, you want to do everything in your power to not have him move, because that is what kills you generally. When it comes to axes, it wouldn't be terrible. You could actually get rid of some of the crosses above you, which honestly pose more of a threat than the crosses in front of you, because they'll just come right down on top of you, and that's very scary and kind of unavoidable. So yeah, I don't know, I've never really given it a shot.
So I think this is a great time to mention it, actually, because I'm planning at least to kind of show off a few more Castlevania games over the course of this marathon. Personally, I feel that the axe is probably the best weapon over Castlevanias, like over the course of them. Because I mentioned how it covers a section of the screen that's usually out of your control above you, and it arcs over. And it deals with so many enemies, it does good damage, and I can't think of a single Castlevania game where the axe is bad. It's that 3 or 4 out of 5 weapon in every game. Every game. So while the holy water is absurdly broken in 1 and 3, for example, it's not so good in certain games. Like in Castlevania 4, it's not so great. It's the cross, and the axe is really good. Even moving into the 3D games or into the Metroidvania style games, like the axe is always just a good standby weapon. You never feel bad about having the axe.
Yeah, you're actually absolutely correct. I think the axe is never bad in a Castlevania game. Maybe some of the newer ones, I don't know, where you can move all over the place, because you can. I don't know why, but in like the classic Vanias, axe is never bad. It's always going to be better than the dagger. Except, could you really make an argument for Castlevania 2? I don't know.
I wouldn't really. I don't know. I wouldn't. It's always kind of a fool's errand to compare one weapon to the other per game. Because, yeah, I could say, like, oh, if you're Richter, the dagger does more damage than the axe if you do a weapon crash or whatever. But it's consistently good. You're never going to be like,
no, yeah,
shit,
definitely.
I got the axe.
The axe is, like you said, consistently good. Especially in Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Axe is the most broken thing ever. You should check it out sometime if you've never seen it. But let's move on to everyone's favorite hall. Something interesting to note here. The crosses actually bounce off of the shields of these knights here. Except right there, it didn't work for some reason. So yeah, on easy mode, not having holy water here is not an issue, because Death is going to die in like 2 hits.
It's actually kind of funny that you mentioned how Legacy of Darkness, and I mentioned Soten, where in Symphony of the Night, the axe is actually really good for Richter as a weapon crash, but it's also really good in Rondo of Blood, which is the precursor to that on the PC engine.
Yeah, it almost seems
which is kind of
planned if that's the case. I didn't even know that about the axe in Soten or Rondo of Blood, mostly because this is the only game I play. This is the only game I own. Well, that's not entirely true, but
so once we get eaten by the castle wall, I think we'll take a short break so that I can empty my bladder so that I do not injure myself greatly. but we will.
Hey.
I have returned.
I'm sorry.
So, how dare you have fun before I
Uh,
fucking get back, you asshole?
I was just demonstrating how, for some reason, the harpies and the fleamen that spawn in the next room, for some reason, if you move too far to the left, they spawn in this room. That's all I was doing. But same thing with normal mode here is the stopwatch just trivializes all of stage 6. There's not a whole lot going on in stage 6. It's very short, so the stopwatch is very strong. I am stuck here for some reason.
So good question here, actually, for the stopwatch. So, in my view, the stopwatch is the best weapon for like the stages themselves, but it's obviously completely useless against bosses. How would you view the stopwatch in a casual viewpoint?
It's like you said, the stopwatches are great throughout the levels themselves. They slow down every single enemy, unless it's timed oddly. Sometimes enemies cannot be frozen. It's weird, but that rarely happens. But yeah.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot here, though. I would like to at least see one crit on Dracula so people can see what that's like. You said it does 6 damage? I thought it was 4, but you said it does 6 damage on Dracula.
It does
one,
deal
right?
4 damage to Dracula, but it has to do with how the crits work, and I honestly don't entirely know. I don't know if the damage goes up exponentially based off how much damage he deals to you and how much damage you deal to him. But when you go for a crit, you're dealing initially 1 point of damage to him, and then you're whipping him a second time for that second point of damage. And then he deals 4 to you. And I guess that when you hit the crit, it deals a 4 extra. Like, I personally don't know the finer details of how it works. I just know that it does work.
The basic premise, though, is that when you crit, you should deal between 4 and 6 damage. And again, you have easy mode. You got some time to kind of show off. This isn't a real push on speedrunning. I'd really like to just show off like what type of damage this does, because it is so crazy how much this does.
So you just want me to show how fast I can beat Dracula on easy mode, or do you want me to just demonstrate how the crit works?
You don't have to do it as fast as you can, but like try and get at least one crit so that they can see, the viewers out there wherever they are in Twitch or YouTube land can see how it kind of works and how abusive it is.
Yeah.
Easy.
So crits in easy mode are insane. They deal a ton of damage. So that 4 to 6 we were talking about on easy mode, actually, if you get a crit on Dracula, it kills him in 1 hit, which is pretty hilarious. So it's kind of worth going for, but in my run, I don't think I got a crit on him. I've gotten the crit on him before, the 1 cycle, but if you fail it, if you don't get it, you actually lose time as opposed to just getting that 2 cycle, because if you miss the crit, it can often go to a 3 cycle Dracula, and it's just bad. But yeah, I'll demonstrate just how easy it is to kill Dracula in easy mode. I'll go exclusively for crits here. All right, let's get him in a good position. So you'll notice he's dealing 2 points of damage to me. That has to do with I'm not gonna get it, am I? That has to do with how the game ramps up difficulty. But like I said, yeah, I'll take the death.
Time to take the death, I guess. Because I really want to see this. I want you to show this to the world, because I think it's pretty both funny and kind of interesting, and really shows off
Something
what
else
crits
worth mentioning
do
here
from a speedrunning
with
perspective.
easy difficulty, you don't lose your sub-weapon when you die, which is huge. Not only do you not lose your sub-weapon, you don't lose your multiplier. And if you pick up another sub-weapon, you would normally lose your multiplier, but you don't lose your multiplier. That's huge, actually. Can't believe I missed that.
Absolutely, that is. I mean, really, that's one of the biggest difficulty spikes of Castlevania, right? Is the damage boosting backward into pits and your sub.
Put on the spot. I really want to demonstrate just how quickly it kills him. Okay, so yeah, he was at half health there, and he just lost all of it. If he was at full health, he still would have lost all of it. And, yeah, that was second for him as well. Hardest game of my life.
So yeah, very, very different game when you play it on easy mode. And hey, you know, if you're, I would almost say if you're just a person that's like, hey, I want to play Castlevania and get an idea of what it's like, I would say do easy mode. Do hard mode if you really want to get the full experience, but if you just want to get an idea of what the game is and what's great about it, I'd say get the Famicom version and try easy mode, see what it's like. Because it's still pretty difficult.
No, yeah, definitely. It's
hard.
definitely a fairly good intro to what the game is like. The one issue I have with easy mode, and I know why they took it out, but the knockback. I mean, when you go from easy to normal mode, that knockback is just gonna be extremely foreign to you. But other than that, it's it lives up to the name of the mode, which is easy. And then just like a normal mode, it goes through a little new game plus here, like you got all your weapons.
So I actually have a question regarding this. How does hard mode on easy mode work? Do you get knockback? Do you get extra damage?
So it's important to point out that the quote-unquote hard mode in this game isn't really a hard mode as much as it is just sort of like a new game plus type thing. You start with everything that you beat the game with, but here's the game again. You know, the difficulty is stuck at that stage 6 difficulty in terms of how much damage you take, and there's more enemies on the screen. It's just something a little bit more challenging. How that
Anything as far as mechanics though, like do you get damage boosted back? Are you still falling flat like a rock? Do you lose your sub weapon? Any of the things that you associate with easy mode that changes, or is it just faster enemies and more damage?
It's just faster enemies and more damage. Like you still don't get knocked back or anything like that. But you know, since it's easy mode, more damage means, you know, losing 1/8 of your health instead of 1/4. So it's actually still very easy. But I guess if you're looking for more of a challenge, this is actually a much smoother transition from easy mode, is playing through it the second time.
All right, so so really quickly, any kind of closing thoughts I want to say on Castlevania?
Well, it's a big pile of shit.
The first game, or even as a series for the NES.
No, I don't actually mean that. Closing thoughts. I don't know. It's... I think it's unique in the fact that it's a difficult game, but honestly, it's not that hard once you know what to do. Compare it to something like Ninja Gaiden, which is difficult for other reasons like um, respawning enemies and shit like that. Uh, that's not really something you have to worry about too much in this game. Um, so I feel like this is one of the earliest examples of a game rewarding the player for being good at it, and not so much just being relentlessly difficult, unfair even.
So I guess one of the other things I would mention, because I've made the contrast before, how would you stack up and compare and contrast Castlevania to the Ninja Gaiden trilogy and the Mega Man series, which obviously had 6 games, but most people only think of the first 3 games.
I definitely think Castlevania was probably one of the more unique experiences. That's kind of hard to say when comparing it to 2 other games, which were, so uniquely different from what just a normal side-scroller was from that time. But it definitely pulled things back, and I was going to say it focused more on something, but I'm not sure what that is. Oh no, I'm going to die. Comparing them, though. I feel like it focused more on smart enemy placement and just level design overall. Whereas, no, Mega Man was pretty good at that too. Yeah, feel free to jump in at any time.
Well, no, I figured I would ask because, as you mentioned, I've talked to you before about this, and you've kind of made fun of me for some of the statements I made on games I enjoyed, but you mentioned that this is your favorite game, and I always like to talk to people about why they like the games they like. And so I guess the biggest closing statement I can always make is, why should anybody give a shit about Castlevania in this year, 2015?
Well, I think my response to that would be, why should anybody give a shit about any game that has ever been released before this year? Now, I just want to point out I was always joking when I make fun of you. I don't care what game a person likes or what they don't like.
Oh no, the Hitman's still coming. Like that's just happening. But I mean, you can try to talk about
as far as why somebody should care about this
something.
game nowadays. It's something we didn't talk about that I've always thought when thinking about Castlevania is just how this game sort of set the grounds for just games in general to come. Not all games, but simple ideas like you having a life bar. You just some games had the same idea in a different form.
A variable life bar being a big thing, which I mentioned again, Ninja Gaiden and Mega Man being big things as well. Like, you don't just take a damage, you take a certain amount of damage based on the enemy and the attack.
Just those 3 games in general definitely really set the groundwork for just what games would actually become. I mean, these are still things that are used in games nowadays. It's kind of hard to break away from it. So I guess as far as why should someone give a shit about Castlevania in uh, the year 2015 is just to sort of, uh, I guess, sort of just see where these ideas originated from. Or if you have a general interest in anything you've ever heard about the game, as far as the great music, the real brilliant art design, or just the gameplay in general. Even if you've heard negative things about, the stiff gameplay. And in addition to that, it's one of the more well-known difficult titles from the NES library. At least those are all reasons I think somebody should check it out.
I think those are pretty decent ideas. Like, it's so hard to kind of drop back to the NES games from a graphical standpoint or gameplay standpoint because it's such a different climate for newer gamers. But I think historically it's a very strong jumping off point because it's new. It really is new for the time and came at a time when this was such an impactful change in video games, rather. But this did it in such a different way. Like, it's a great course in how changing the way your character moves changes the way a game plays. And if you're talking about gameplay in general, I think that NES games are important because not only graphically are they interesting from pixel art, but there's something charming about playing an NES game or any old game and picking it up in the same day and beating it in the same day, as long as you have the commitment and the skill and you're willing to think about a game. And that is so motivating to me personally. And I really enjoy that. And that's why I do my retro gaming, personally. Like, I don't know, like, I guess, why do you do retro gaming, KK? As opposed to playing Call of Duty 98, Black Ops 420,
honestly,
69.
I don't really... I never really think about that, I guess, when it comes to games like this. Without getting too much into my own personal life, I didn't exactly have the wealthiest of childhoods, so when I was like 5 or 6 in like 97 or 98, like I'd visit my grandparents' house and this is what we had, was an NES, or I'd visit my uncle's house and we had an Atari. So I'm kind of just used to playing old shit. Like, I've never really thought about it, I guess. When it comes to why I specifically play an older game like this, it has more to do with just me enjoying the game as a whole, and less to do with it being older. But like you mentioned, I do have a ton of respect for just the skill put into these games with just how little they had to work with. And I think that anybody even remotely interested in retro gaming, that's probably going to be what they're looking at when they go to look at these older games, is not so much just the games, how they look, or I guess, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. They're going to be looking into it more for the aesthetic of older games. Yeah.
I love how we decided to go on the side tangent and we've almost gotten over halfway through the game on this. But I think that's good. Like, obviously this is a very short game in general. And that's why I kind of was glad that Comrade Control decided to play this game on easy and normal, both to show the differences between the two and just to kind of showcase the game. But yeah, it's a very short game. Very hard if you're playing it normally, casually, without these strats, but very worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a rewarding experience beating this game. Like even the ending credits, which I'm not sure if games back in '86 had that kind of a credit sequence. Like some had just kind of movie-esque ending sequences with just credits scrolling down a black screen. This made it a little bit more cinematic, and sort of seeing the castle crumble as the victory music plays is it just kind of fills you with sort of that "oh, I did it" feeling.
And obviously a stark contrast to, say, Ghostbusters or
yes.
Ghosts and Goblins.
Huge difference. Whether it's the horrible, I'm assuming Japanese to English translation, or just how it's, like I said, just white text on a black screen, which is, boring. But, most people don't really put a whole lot of thought into credits, I suppose. But yeah, like it's kind of one of the harder questions to ask me, I think, is because I never really have a good answer for it. Like why is Castlevania my favorite game? Like, why do I like this more than some of my other favorite games? Fuck if I know. I just really love this game.
And sometimes that's all you need, right? Like, sometimes you can't really express. Maybe you don't have the vocabulary or you haven't thought about it exactly as much, but it's completely valid as long as you've thought about it at all. And here we go.
That was actually a really bad death fight. I was kind of just supposed to throw 2 holy water, jump, whip, but I got lazy and just kept throwing holy water. And because of the rule of having only 3 sub-weapons on the screen when you have the triple multiplier, which is the highest it'll go, I had a slight pause in between those throws. But I guess we can go for that, I guess we can try and get that 1 cycle drac.
So I guess we're gonna go ahead and kind of finish up this run, this hard, easy run. But how would you kind of compare and contrast this to? I guess I've seen you play Castlevania 4. How would you view it between the others in the series on the NES and Castlevania 4 on the Super NES?
Well, it's kind of hard, I think, to compare this game to the other ones, besides maybe Castlevania 4, because this is sort of the more, I guess you could say, experimental era of video games. Like there's a huge difference between Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 2. It's like not even playing the same game almost. It looks like it. Simon controls essentially the same way. But other than that, gameplay-wise, it's completely different. Well, except for what I just mentioned. Like, compared to something like Super Mario 2, which I believe wasn't even supposed to be a Mario game to begin with, but just became one.
Let's not talk about that. Quiet words
So
for the Japanese.
yeah, I think it's
hatred of
kind of difficult to
Americans.
compare them, but because Castlevania 2 is just such a drastically different game. It's more of like an RPG, open-ended experience, and then the third game, of course, also introduced new things like playing as different characters, which is something that would actually be used in later games, which I'm kind of glad they do. You know, they pull from older games. It's like when you look at the games as a whole, it's sort of like a learning experience that they went through from game to game. Like how can we better make how can we make a Castlevania game better going forward? Comparing them though is tough for me.
So I guess the last mechanical question I really ask of you is,
Uh,
are you familiar with
I'm gonna say
Koji
maybe.
Igarashi?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so Iga is the person that kind of took the reins of the Castlevania series with Symphony of the Night and going on forward. How do you feel about the games moving from that classic Vania into something closer to an open world exploration to
Yeah,
be
I
doing?
thought you were talking about Iga. I just didn't. I never really actually heard his full name. But honestly, as much shit as I give Symphony of the Night, uh, jokingly, of course, I do think Symphony of the Night is a damn fine game. And as far as him taking over, I think he's director of some sort, and maybe art design. I can't remember, but it was definitely the best thing Konami could have done for Castlevania games. And pretty much any Castlevania game that doesn't have his name attached to it after Symphony of the Night is something you're probably not going to enjoy. He just I don't know. I don't even play those newer games.
An
I don't know what those
interesting
are.
perspective, but
Well,
I
this is
can
like there's
respect
like
it.
20 of those newer games. I don't even know.
All right, so let's go ahead and bop Dracula real quick, and then we'll go ahead and move on to kind of final words
All
on
right.
the game.
So we're just gonna try and go for that super fast kill. Hopefully, I can one cycle it. Nope. Yeah, pretty much. I don't want to talk about it, man.
Spoiler: no one cycle.
Okay, well, that was garbage. And I still survived. It's so easy.
Easy mode, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So we already did our final thoughts on it. So once again, one more time, anything that you want to add to the folks before we kind of cut stream here? Besides Borlis,
Yeah,
Karlothus, and
classic Vanias are
Bello
better than
Lugosi.
Metroidvanias, and you should pick them up on your Wii Virtual Console. Or just play all the games in the series. But this one, in particular, you should probably play first. In my opinion. For many reasons I think we already mentioned.
All right. So that's going to do it for Castlevania 1. I will be back with other Castlevania games during this spooky October-thon, but I figured I would get somebody that's very versed in this game and that really loves it to talk about it. But yeah, I will catch you guys another time. Thank you very much for watching. And hopefully this entices you to play some Classicvania, and in particular, Castlevania 1. Thank you for playing. Thank you for watching. Take it easy.
Yeah. Um,
Final
Play this
words,
game and only this game.
KK? Buy this game and only this game. You heard it first, kids. See you later.